I'm your host, Rahul Sehgal, and today I have great pleasure of speaking with someone who has spent decades at the intersection of engineering, technology, and leadership. My guest today is Steve Burrows, a chartered civil and structural engineer, former senior leader at Arup and other engineering organizations, and now the founder of B2B Burrows, where he advises forward thinking businesses on strategy, growth, and innovation.
I live in California now, but I was brought up in northwest England. And my dad talked about engineers as though he held them in the highest esteem.
Do you think the companies like Autodesk, McNeil have moved the needle in that respect, or we are still facing challenges?
We still have BIM as predominantly a drafting tool and a documentation tool, and not really hasn't ever realized its ability to impact the design process in a holistic way, nor has it impacted the construction and manufacturing process.
Housing affordability is a crisis in the UK and the US and globally.
Two people would live in houses that were about between 1,000 and 1,200 square feet, 100 to 120 square meters, would house two people. And they may have a family and end up with four people living in 120 square meters. I think businesses are just blank canvases and you paint on them whatever you want. I was awarded a CBE by the Queen in 2009. I led the engineering team for the Bird's Nest Stadium for the Beijing Olympics. And I've done a variety of projects around the world. AI will replace the work that people do. Simply knowledge work is going to become irrelevant. AI creates enormous opportunities for everybody. You've got a choice to either be a victim to actually do something about it. Businesses exist to satisfy clients' demands profitably. Biggest myth is that lowest tender is the best price.
Welcome to CEO 360, the podcast where we go beyond the headlines and sit down with the leaders who are shaping the world around us. I'm your host, Rahul Sehgal, and today I have great pleasure of speaking with someone who has spent decades at the intersection of engineering, technology, and leadership. My guest today is Steve Burrows, a chartered civil and structural engineer, former senior leader at Arup and other engineering organizations. Some of the world's most respected architecture and engineering firms he has worked with, and now the founder of B2B Burrows, where he advises forward thinking businesses on strategy, growth, and innovation. Steve was awarded a CBE, Commander of the Order of British Empire, for his services to the built environment and holds the fellowship from both the Institution of Civil Engineers and the American Society of Civil Engineers. His work spans PropTech construction innovation, leadership development, and mergers and acquisition advisory. Steve, a very warm welcome to CEO 360.
Thank you very much. Nice to be here.
So let's begin with origin and motivation. Before we deep dive into your entire career, take me back to the very beginning. Where did the love of engineering come from? Was there a movement or a person that pointed you in that direction, or it was the only way to approach life at that time you saw in while back in the days?
Let's think about when those days were. So I was brought up. I live in California now, but I was brought up in northwest England, and my dad he worked on a JCB, a digger, and he drove wagons moving material from the quarry to road sites. Um, and he could talk about engineers as though he held them in the highest esteem. So that was really my first awareness that there was even a thing called engineering. And was my dad talked about the civil engineer as this sort of incredibly um, sort of important person in his working life. But I didn't really aspire to be an engineer. I was pretty good at mathematics, and then I sort of went off the rails. I would say when I was 15, 16, 17, 18. I went into some very strange directions, motorbikes and all sorts of things. And and as a result, I failed my A levels, which were basically the qualifications to get into university. And so I didn't know what to do. I got a job, started to do day release school. But one of my friends, and he had gone to Liverpool Polytechnic and was studying civil engineering. And once I got enough qualifications to go to college, I thought I thought I was smarter than him, and I thought if his name's Mark Hennessy, and if he hears this, I'm sure he knows this. I thought I was smarter than him, and I thought if he could do it, I could do it, and that was really it. So it was pretty well by chance that I went into engineering. I didn't really know what a civil engineer did, and I went to college, and at the time at college, I learned what engineers do and the pieces of engineering that interest me.
Oh, that's a good beginning. And you built your career at various architecture and engineering consultancy companies, some of the most iconic firms in the world. What did they teach you what you couldn't have learned anywhere else?
Yeah, I mean, just to give you perspective, I mean, I joined Arup straight out of school, and actually I applied to Arup, and they said they wouldn't take me because I didn't go to the right universities. And then there was a change of leadership in the office I applied to, and then I was offered a job afterwards. Um, I actually wrote them a letter telling them that I would make it my life's ambition to show them it was a mistake not hiring me. And the second person got that letter and called me, and he said he thought I was very arrogant, and he was looking for somebody that had something about them. So, go figure. I stayed at Arup for 29 years, moved to the United States with Arup in after a period of 24 years. So I stayed 5 years in the United States with Arup. But at the time, Arup, at the board level, we were talking about ACOM as a threat, and I sort of saw that ACOM had acquired some amazing companies, and thought what they were doing. We grew by organically, and ACOM was growing by acquisition. And even though at the board level we were very dismissive of what ACOM was doing, I was incredibly intrigued, and so I joined ACOM, and I led ACOM's buildings business in the US and Canada for a while. And then I thought, gosh, I wish I could have built ACOM myself. I wish I could have been part of building it, because I was dealing with the post-acquisition phase, and so some of the rules, we'll talk about it later, but some of the rules had been set, and I wish they'd have been different. And at the time, WSP wanted to grow its US business. It was a few hundred people, and it wanted to be many thousands, and they were going to do it by acquisition. And I thought, I've got a chance to build something from scratch. And so I joined WSP, spent best part of 5 years there, and then went into Silicon Valley. I was head of engineering at Katera, and then I went on my own. So that's really my career story. Really kind of follow opportunities. There was nothing at any company that I learned that I couldn't have learned anywhere else. I think businesses are just blank canvases, and you paint on them whatever you want. They give you the ability to do what you want to do, but it comes from you. It doesn't come. Arup never gave me anything, but there were opportunities were created there. I was able to do something with, and that's how I see it, really.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I think that's a good message there. That the companies are made to to achieve the aims of the built environment through the individuals, which they are planning to. You were awarded a CBE for services to the built environment. What does that honor mean to you personally, and what do you think it was really recognizing?
Well, I was awarded a CBE by the Queen in 2009, and the title of it was for services to engineering overseas. So, I was part of the team. I led the engineering team for the Bird's Nest Stadium for the Beijing Olympics, and I'd done a variety of projects around the world. And really, that comes from my point about Arup. Arup, I was working in the Arup Manchester office that did local work, and once I got into a leadership position, I felt I wanted to do the sort of work that Arup would aspire to do, not the Arup Manchester office. I didn't want to do local work in Manchester. I wanted to use the capabilities of the company to work around the world. As soon as I became a leader, the biggest market in the world at the time for buildings was Hong Kong. I went to Hong Kong and I did projects there. And that grew my love of yeah, being based in an Arab office, but being able to work anywhere in the world. My second love is sport. Unfortunately, I'm a Manchester United supporter, and I wanted to get involved in sports building. So stadiums were the sort of natural thing for me. So I tried to create. I said, "Gosh, Arab has done some stadiums, but it doesn't really have a stadium business. I'm going to try and create business around just doing stadiums." And that's what I did for the last 10 years or so. My time at Arab, I just worked on stadiums around the world. I did the same. I did some stadiums at ACOM and I did some stadiums at WSP too. So that was sort of my passion allied to the opportunity.
Yeah. I remember from my experience, there is a name Populous comes to my mind when it comes to sports business and the stadium industries. And yeah, I was following their projects, and that's also one of the companies I admire for their sports architecture. Also, Fostering Partners has a good sports division.
Well, there's a long story we could go off on, fostering partners in sport, but we created Arab sport and designed, City Manchester Stadium, Allianz Arena, Bird's Nest Stadium, Donbass Arena in eastern Ukraine, Singapore Sports Hub. I could go on with like the projects that we were doing. But to go back to your question was, what did this CBE mean for me? And it was, I grew up in a very poor place. My parents didn't have very much money, and we lived in a town that, some people might describe as a slum. And for me, going to Buckingham Palace, and I rented a vintage Rolls Royce, and I did the whole day in Buckingham Palace with my family, and then went home to see my parents in the Rolls Royce that I'd been to Buckingham Palace in. It sort of felt like validation, even though, I know it's a personal honor. Most of the honors you get in the construction industry relate to projects, but this was the first, really significant personal honor that I'd got,
Yeah.
and I'm very proud of it. My parents were very proud of it, and it's something that I could not have imagined growing up as a child in my hometown. So yeah, it changed everything for me. It felt like my work was validated.
Nice. And correct me if I'm wrong here. I think this is the highest individual professional award an individual can get. Correct?
You can become knighted, which is the highest honor. A
Okay, rated, yes.
CBE is, and then you become sir. A CBE is the next highest honor, and my friends refer to me now as Commander Burrows.
Nice. After such a distinguished career inside various major A&E firms, I would say, you made a decision to go independent with B2 Burrows. What was the moment you knew it was a time to step out and do it in your own way?
So going out on my own wasn't so much a personal choice. So this is a podcast about what happens in the C-suite. So I was at Katera, and I was part of the leadership at Katera. Katera, for those who don't know, was a startup created by Michael Marks, been CEO of Flextronics. He was interim CEO at Tesla and successful career. And he wanted to create a construction disruption firm, raised a huge amount of capital. So through predominantly SoftBank, we raised, you know, well over $1 billion of capital to create a construction disruption company. Now, um, Michael and I did not agree on the direction of travel for Katera. Um, his belief was if we scaled the business, the unit costs would come down, and I didn't agree with that for construction. It might work for microelectronics. I didn't think it was true for construction, and I would say our disagreements sort of spilled over, and not that it was acrimonious at all, but it was pretty clear that that my view was that we were raising capital, and then we were losing that capital by doing projects under cost, with the hope that we could get the cost down. I felt we should focus on being able to deliver projects below cost before we started selling them. So very different approach. And and it was clear, and not of my choosing, that Michael and I couldn't continue to work together. So he was very kind to me. I exited Terra, and he was very good to me. I have no, I like Michael, and I have no problems with him whatsoever. I agree with what he did, but I was left with in a situation where I thought, what do I do next? So it's not very often you're in a situation where you think, well, I don't need to do anything for money. Why don't I look at things? What would I, if I had free choice, what would I choose to do? And so I thought, I would like to help other people. So I thought I'd like to continue the journey of startups. So I wanted to stay involved in startups, and I still am. And I want to be able to help people to understand what does it mean? What does disruption mean for a traditional company in construction? So I thought those are two things I'd like to do. I wonder if I can fill my time doing those things, and it turns out that I can.
Okay, good end of our chapter one. Um, it, it went really fast, and I think there were some good hidden key messages, which we will go in the next session in more detail in the next chapters. Moving to the chapter two, which is all around the built environment, innovation, inefficiencies, and a prop tech.
Yeah,
Uh, you, you have written about misaligned incentives in the construction and AEC industry.
yeah,
Where do those misalignments sit, and who ultimately pays the price? Is it the asset owner, a developer, channel partners, or a consumer in the end, or let's say clients or customers there who are buying the property or who are using the infrastructure assets? So who are ultimately paying the price?
well, so ultimately, the client pays for everything, and and then the users have to live with the consequences forever. So let's go back to the beginning. Construction is one of the few industries in which the customer, the actual user, has virtually no say in what gets created. Almost every other product I've got one of these things here, and I've got things that operate shades, and I've got music, and all of that is based around the user. My thumbs, how the screen works, or how the channels work on this, or whatever it might be, how this glass works. It's designed around the user. Construction isn't. So the user has virtually no input. So when I say the incentives are misaligned, if you're an architect or an engineer, what is your business model? So it's a labor arbitrage business model. So hire some people, pay them some money, and sell every hour for more money than you pay them plus overhead. And the difference between that is profit. So you basically sell hours. And what do clients buy? Clients buy the product of your work. So you sell time, but the client wants a product. They're not aligned, right? If you got paid for the product that you delivered, the value of the product, they would your incentives would be aligned. And then we do say, well, let's bid out the work to contractors and subcontractors and operators or whatever the procurement model might be, and let's pick the people who give us the lowest price, which is usually the person who has misunderstood the project the most. And then we say, oh, the project goes over budget and it's late, and the subcontractors are doing the design, not the architects and engineers. And so the architects and engineers do design intent drawings and call them construction drawings, but they're not. Nobody builds from construction drawings. The process, which was aligned when I started in the early 1980s, the process was aligned, and it's become misaligned over time. And the reason it is, if we take it C-suite level, once competitive bidding arrived at the C-suite, you start to make decisions. You say, which parts of the scope of work are the highest risk?
Mm,
Let's not do them. And so you start to shed all of the work. You want to do the work that has good cash flow, that you get paid as early as possible, and you want to get rid of all the work that is highest risk. And highest risk is construction. So you stay away from cost, you stay away from means and methods, you stay away from the supply chain. And the construction industry consequently became incredibly fragmented. And that's what I mean. We've got a misaligned incentives is that the motivation for this change came from the wish of the owners to drive costs down, but competitive tendering was not the answer.
mm. Okay. So that's a good point. Um, I have seen I have seen it while in the industry that it's always the competitive tendering which makes the decisions. And spot on there. Moving to the second one, in this chapter, the construction sector is often described as one of the least digitized industries in the world. We got BIM, we got automations, we have got multiple along during the time we got multiple automation and digitized technologies, but there was VR, XR at some point. Why has it been so resistant to change, in your opinion?
Yeah, see, well, first of all, you say the construction industry is described as the least digitized in the world, and I'm sure there is data that supports that. Right? The reality is, though, that I don't think that construction is at all resistant to change, and I don't think that the construction industry is as poorly digitized as a McKinsey report, 20 years ago, which everybody seems to glop onto like it's a tablet of stone. Uh, you know, I mean, some guys wrote a report and said a whole bunch of things about construction, and nobody really. It seems like the world hasn't moved on since that report. The fact of the matter is, most processes are are to some degree have been disrupted by technology. But what you've got is how do you sell how do you sell into an industry that I just described in the first question, which is completely fragmented with misaligned incentives? I mean, who buys? If we look at through the other end of this telescope, let's say you invented a cure for cancer technology for construction, right? How would you sell it? Because construction doesn't buy enterprise software. Very rarely buys enterprise software. You might argue that Revit, is is an example of where they have, or maybe some of the scheduling software that construction companies use are bought on an enterprise level, but very little design software or cost software is bought on an enterprise level. It's bought on a project basis. So every project is bid. There's a different team of people that work on every single project. They don't know each other. They don't know their strengths and weaknesses. Imagine Manchester United trying to win the league. If every game it was a different group of people, right? It would, would it? And so there's no ability and you're trying to sell software into that. If we win the job, we'll buy the software. If we don't win the job, we won't. And then we haven't got time to learn the software or understand its implementation or its value. And it's not really an industry that has opened itself up to the ability for I'm talking about software. I mean, technology is more than just software, but talking about software first, the technology to certainly software to penetrate the construction industry as readily as it can in other industries. If you look at accounting or um, there are big three players. If you can sell into the big three players, you probably sold to 90% of the industry. Not true in construction. Nobody in construction in any geography that I'm aware of has 1% market share. Nobody. I mean, you can't get more fragmented. So, the ACOMs and the WSPs who built these massive organizations are simply trying to aggregate an industry that's just full of small players. I mean, Arup is, I can't remember its number now, but Arup is 15 or 16,000 people or something like that. And WSP is 75,000 people. And and Arup was once, the biggest company, and now they're not, they're 20% of the biggest company. The industry's trying to aggregate a bit, but contractors, there's no national contractor that works everywhere in the United States of America. None. And so I think this idea that the construction industry is resistant, there is not really a platform that you can sell into. And it's more of an organizational problem than it is a resistance to change problem. And equally, just to finish the story, the approval process, the authorities having jurisdiction that give approval are incredibly fragmented as well. So they won't accept a piece of standard software that solved the problem. They want to talk to the person who did it. They want to see the calculations printed out on paper. And we've got a very old-fashioned approval process that operates throughout the construction industry. It's still in the 1970s. So so construction is wide open. There's lots of opportunities, but the industry isn't organized well enough to adopt some of these changes as quickly as it could.
But do you think the companies like Autodesk, McNeil have moved the needle in that respect, or we are still facing challenges in there?
I think certainly they have in some regards, but the Autodesk have made a number of acquisitions which looked interesting initially, but those acquisitions never really flowed through into the design process. We still have BIM as predominantly a drafting tool and a documentation tool, and not really hasn't ever realized its ability to impact the design process and in a holistic way, nor has it impacted the construction manufacturing process. You can't easily go from CAD to CAM. So even Autodesk has different packages that aren't very interoperable and need quite a lot of work to make them talk to each other. So Autodesk doesn't have an offer beginning to end that is as smooth. It could be adopted on a by a customer, by a client, for their entire projects. And just to go back, in the 1990s, the mass transit rail system in Hong Kong did have a very smooth system for going from end to end, and they were very detailed about how documents had to be produced, and it made the construction process incredibly efficient. It just hasn't really been done anywhere else.
I
Maybe a
see.
little bit in Singapore, but not too many other places.
Mm, great. PropTech is the another buzzword for years, but the results have been mixed. From your point, what PropTech innovations are actually moving the needle, and what's still mostly the hype? Because it's a wide term to be used. Um, what has moved the needle, and what's the hype?
Yeah, I've never been a bit. I mean, a lot of these labels, and BIM is another one, that sustainability is another one, that they get widely misunderstood, and I think prop tech is widely misunderstood. If you go back to the fundamental problems with the construction industry, I have a pretty simple approach to solving any problem, right? It's a three-step process. So, step one, understand the problem that you're trying to solve. Right. Step two, get the right people around the table to solve the problem with the right skill. So not hubris, knowledge. And step three, have a plan that if you produce a solution, you can actually scale it. It doesn't end up being a one-off solution. Right. So that's how I think you approach any problem. And if you look at construction, construction has three problems that we could all agree on. One, cost. Too expensive. Everything is too expensive. Secondly, labor. Labor is aging. Skilled labor is diminishing in the market. There's not enough of it, and we've got we're facing huge labor shortages if we're going to solve some of the infrastructure problems that we have. And then finally, productivity is low. So, the amount of hours that go into a project, there's a lot of data that says almost half of those hours add no value. So people are spending 40 hours a week and adding 20 hours of value. So those are the problems facing the construction industry. If you then say, well, how are you going to solve them? There are lots of prop tech solutions. There are lots of startup solutions focused on solving each of those problems. So if it's labor productivity around electrician, we know that you can buy a 90-inch television in a Best Buy, and you don't need an electrician to install it, right? But if you want to put a box in your garage to power your electric vehicle, you need to hire an electrician. So if you could plug that box into the mains, you wouldn't need an electrician. So it's a connection problem. The boxes come completely approved. There's a connection problem. Same connection problems relate to structure, mechanical systems, all sorts of things, architectural systems. So if we can find a way that you can build without skilled labor, you can solve the labor problem. And there are people looking at these. Same on the cost side. Right now, all modular off-site modular solutions try to mimic on-site solutions because the approval process want to see it look like something they've seen before. If we could approve buildings in factories without building department could approve a building in factory that they didn't have to look at again on a construction site, we could drive costs down substantially. My estimate, 30% we could take out of the cost. Um, but right now, offsite construction has to then go to site and be built like stick-built construction on site. So there are people trying to solve each of these little productivity steps, make bidding more efficient. There are various solutions everywhere, but they're all playing this fragmented industry, and so there's nothing that really is scaled right now.
I see. So it's not a problem to scale. Is it a problem of connecting various disciplines? And by building somewhere else rather than in the site. Is this what we are drawing the conclusion towards?
If the UK, as an example,
Yeah.
if the UK wanted to solve its housing problem, and and the first part of it wanted to solve was to build homes as cost effectively as possible. The UK created a model home for the UK that was incredibly efficient and was pre-approved, and then asked the construction industry to manufacture and construct it. They would drive the costs way down.
That gives us the ending of our chapter 2. So housing affordability is a crisis in the UK and the US and globally. Um, and this is, I'm talking about the affordability specifically here. Is this fundamentally a supply problem, a planning problem, or something else completely we are missing out? What needs to change, if you can help us to understand what needs to change at the system or at the policy level?
Yeah, I mean, so we were talking about how messed up the construction industry is, and I think housing is a really good example of that. Um, and I think there are three parts to this, and I'll go over them. I'll go over them each. But the first thing is, we built a lot of housing. We have built a lot of housing, and when we built housing just after the Second World War in the United, if I use the United States, and you excuse me, you use an imperial unit for a moment. Um, Two people would live in houses that were about between 1,000 and 1,200 square feet, 100 to 120 square meters, would house two people, and they may have a family and end up with four people living in 120 square meters. Right, that's how it was. Today, the average size of a house in the United States is about twice double that. And many of the people in my generation have built wealth through owning real estate. But they built their net worth through real estate. So I'm an example. I live, two of us live in a house that is 4,000 square feet,
Yeah.
six bedroom,
Okay.
two people, right?
Yeah.
400 square meters of house.
Yeah.
Now, this house could house eight people,
Yeah.
easily, eight people. And
Yeah.
this is true everywhere. So in this area where there are the problem is we're not densely occupying the houses that we've already built. We've created this this um, society, this generation of people who live in far more space than they actually need, and it happens everywhere. So, I've been advocating that the government should tax people based on the square footage of space, the density of which they occupy the space.
Mm.
If the government said to me, "Look, we think every person needs 500 square feet, so you should have 1,000 square feet, and you're actually occupying it at 2,000 square feet per person, we're going to multiply your property tax by four."
Okay.
I would probably sell my house and get a smaller house. This whole idea of 25-year loan is broken. I think there is no more land being created, so we have to more densely occupy suburbia, and NIMBYism, people who are saying, "You're not going to do it in my backyard," is a problem and needs a national reset, in order to make homes, more residential land more densely occupied.
Mm-hmm.
And on the building side, buildings are currently custom products made from standard parts, and buildings need to become standard products made from standard parts. So, you might say they will all look the same. Well, they all look broadly the same already. Um, One small step to make them standardized. And if you had, if there were only three types of bathrooms and only four types of kitchens, and only 10 different floor plan layouts, you could productize housing nationally. And why wouldn't you do that?
Hmm, interesting.
And when we go to places, if we go to, I'm going to Italy next month, and we're going to places where they have, and I'm also going to Norway, and they have places where they have houses that are all the same, painted different colors, and we think they're beautiful, but we don't do it. We don't do it today.
But in UK, if we see the houses, the house in which I live is particularly built in 80s, and it was probably a new township which a developer might have developed at that time. They all look the same. Um,
But they're not a product. But they're not productized
yeah, exactly. They're not
because
productized.
because they're all the same for that project. And
Yeah,
then the next project, they might all be the same, but they're all different to the last one. And
yeah.
the next project, they'll all be the same and they'll be different to the last two. How do you build a factory? Imagine that if you said, I'm going to make cars, right? And I'm going to make them all the same when this month. And then they're all going to be all the same, but different next month. And all the same, but different the third month. People would think you were crazy.
Yeah.
But that's what we do with construction.
Mm. There are various debates around it. Some people support the productization of the housing, and some actually oppose it. And it's I think we have not settled on that debate until now. Um, and
But
it's
they all look the same. They all look the same anyway. I mean, if you go and look at red row homes in the UK, every red row house looks exactly the same, but it's not a product.
yeah,
So,
that's
and if you want to have it made, if you want to reduce the labor required to build a red row home, you have to
mm,
productize it, get it approved in a factory environment, and then build it on site or just erect it on site exactly the same as you would plug in your 90-inch TV. Just plug it into the utilities. And no building department, fire department, nobody comes and looks at it because it was approved in the factory.
I see. Thank you, Steve. This wraps up our chapter two. Um, I think I'm enjoying this conversation a lot. Moving to the another chapter, chapter three, which is AI automation and the future of AEC. You have been very candid about AI's potential to replace significant portion of professional work, including in engineering. How do you see AI reshaping the industry over the next decade, or we will get the notional productivity benefits only with the AI as well?
Yeah, I think all of these things we're talking about, that you have them as different chapters, but they're very much interrelated. And so what has happened with let's take architecture and engineering. Our architects and engineers have now said to themselves, because we have competitive fee bidding, we're going to get rid of, we're not going to get involved in costs or means and methods. We're going to produce a set of documents that go out to bid and get a permit for the project. So the primary purpose of their work is a permit from the building department and a set of bid documents to go out to the contractor, who will then produce the construction drawings, which they term fabrication drawing, to distinguish between the construction drawings that the AE firms produce that can't be built from, right? So so that's what's happened, and as a result of that, most of the work architects and engineers do is simply complying with a code because they need a permit. It
Mm.
has to. It's like taking an exam, and it's a pass fail. Right? So, and there are just rules. Now, that is perfect for AI. If you had an agentic AI bot watching the keystrokes that an engineer makes in order to take an architect's document and get a permit set, it would be able to do it itself without human involvement. And as the world goes on, and if you consider that at the moment, architect and engineers' revenue is based on what we call a net labor multiplier.
Yeah.
So you have 40 hours in a week, you have a utilization target of 80%. So you've got 32 hours of billable, and the 32 hours of billable have got to be at a multiple of 3 times salary, something like that. That's the model. But what if you could do that in 1 hour? What if you could do that work in 1 hour? What would you sell? You wouldn't sell time anymore. You would
Yeah.
sell you would sell value. You would say, because it costs me almost nothing to get a permit, I will take, a percentage of the increased value that I created through the delivery of that permit. So I think AI will replace the work that people do simply because the current business model is not sustainable of selling out. Nobody wants it. Clients don't want to buy hours. That's not what they buy. And there's a different way to do it now. And so we're going to enter a period where we're going to see that change starting to happen. It's happened in other industries like
Yeah.
software, software. Look at how many people that Meta will lay off in the next year, or Oracle, or any of these companies, because I use software to write. I use AI to write software. Claude can write code now. You give it a spreadsheet and tell it what you want it to do, and it writes it. Why would you ever need a human to write code? And it won't be very long before it's exactly the same in architecture and engineering. Design me, take these architectural drawings and produce me a set of drawings that can meet the fire code for the city of Gromwich, and it will do it. And so that will change everything. It will change everything for people. I don't think it will take a decade. I think it will be much less than that.
Interesting. But do you think that it will limit creative aspect of any project? I'm not talking about housing project here, but some other project which requires some creativity, and then a collaboration between architecture, engineering, and the manufacturer, which happens early in the project. Special projects like we mentioned, sports architecture there.
I don't think it limits creativity at all because, first of all, humans are, IQ scores have been going down since the birth of the internet. So, we have a brain and it's made of meat and it has a very limited capacity. And we now augment our brain, with with this. And because we don't have to remember anything, we can, what was the name of that guy in that film? Just search it, I'll find the guy. I don't have to remember anything. So people have stopped. I just read an article on children reading books, or people reading books, but children particularly. It fell 40% in the last year. So 40% less children. 40. Very soon, nobody will be reading. Like, you can listen to a podcast like this and learn. You don't need to read it in a book. So 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 everything is changing, and creativity. There is a way to measure creativity scores of people, and if you look at them for engineering, for example, people are more creative when they enter engineering undergraduate degrees than they are when they leave. We make less creative people, so because they spend all their time learning the rules, and if you want to find a creative engineer, good luck, because there are less of them now, in my opinion, than there were, because they don't need to be creative. It's and so that's one thing. The second thing is, go to my very first point about, you said, what did the companies that I work for teach me that I couldn't have got anywhere else? I said the companies are a blank canvas. You paint on them whatever you want. If you as an individual say, I am going to create a way to do work that nobody else can do as efficiently as possible using the tools and systems that are out there, you can create a career that will like send you into superstar status. The opportunities for young people are fantastic, but you can't follow my career path. It's not the same process. The learning by rote that I had to do is completely unnecessary now.
That's interesting. Everything is changing. The roles will evolve. The roles will change, um, and the industry would move, but the business would stay. The industry would stay because it's ultimately the requirement there. I was reading an article on the internet, and during an automation, an engineer said that now we don't need as much labor in a manufacturing unit as we needed 30 years ago because of the automation. And then some worker replied, "Did you realize that you also removed those people from the market of buying your product?" So the economies are tightened like that. The economies are running like that. So how do you think that that would attain a balance, or there would be a disruption altogether?
So yeah, I'm super interested in this. But if let's go back, say 20,000 years ago, something like that. And you probably don't remember that, but I'm nearly that old, right? So no, but 20,000 years ago, humans were hunter gatherers. They chased animals and they caught them because animals sweat from their tongue and humans sweat from their whole body. And so eventually, if they keep going, even though the animal's faster, they will wear them down and they can catch them. And so they got protein and they were able to live, right? And then 12,000 years ago, humans started farming and having spent most of their life their evolution upright, they suddenly were bent over and they got bad backs and they farmed in the fields, and that's what happened. And then if you went go a bit further on, the Industrial Revolution happened and strength became irrelevant, and all of these fitness clubs and gymnasiums it came about because nobody got enough exercise anymore because they didn't have to chase animals, they didn't have to bend over in the fields, they didn't have to work in the factories with the by machines, and and everything changed. And now, what is happening is we became intelligent, and we had to do that. We did this. This was our intelligent. On type, we typed things in, and we've in a had period of 25 years where this has been our value, our brain and our fingers. And now we have a technology that makes those two things irrelevant. So humans have always had to do something else. And we're entering a period. You and I could have a podcast for the next 8 hours on what will humans be doing after knowledge work becomes irrelevant. And we won't we'll be trying to predict the future. But I'm pretty sure we could agree knowledge work is going to become irrelevant. And that's what we're talking about. Action is knowledge work. So it used to have to an electrician used to have to know they'd installed enough and they learned and they had an apprenticeship and they were a knowledge worker. Doesn't matter anymore. A robot can do it and has all the knowledge that anybody could ever want and more. So why do you need an electrician?
There's always a tension between excitement around AI productivity gains and concern what it means for the next generation of graduates entering the profession. How do you think the the roles would be much more disruptive, or there will be a nominal path for the coming generation for the graduates?
You say there's a tension. I mean, does GDP care about how it's created? Not really. And, Elon Musk thinks there will be a universal basic wage paid to everybody. And people say, well, what will people do? But before COVID, we spent 2 or 3 hours a day commuting to work. And after COVID, we don't. It doesn't mean we can't find anything to do with the 2 to 3 hours. Maybe we will have stronger communities, and maybe life will be more fun. Maybe we won't be slaves to a job. And this is sort of the dream of in the 1950s and 60s. This was the dream that people wouldn't have to work anymore. We imagined the future. And I saw a video from 1925 imagining a future with no work. Well, we just happen to be in a generation where it's going to happen. We can't prevent progress, and we could say to ourselves, um, I mean, this planet is going to end, right? I mean, Earth is seven. If Earth was going to live to 100 years, it's 70 years old today. It's the sun is going to expand, and the Earth is going to end. So everything's going to end. This whole civilization is going to end. And the only question is, in the little pieces of it that we experience, how do we want to spend our limited amount of time on it? And I'm saying right now, AI creates enormous opportunities for everybody, and it also flattens the pyramid. In the organization used to be there was a CEO, and then chief financial officer, chief operating officer, and then a board structure, and it was this pyramid. Well, AI has just flattened the pyramid. You know more than the CEO knows now. What are you gonna do with it? What are you gonna do with that? And that's where the opportunity is in startups, because anybody you could create a new engineering AI-enabled startup that could undermine the entire engineering consultancy profession. You could.
Interesting. So, is this the advice which you are
Mm.
giving today to AEC firms and startups? And what AI capabilities are you telling them they need to build, buy, or partner on right now? Not in 5 years, but right now in a span of an year or a two.
So my advice generally falls in a few headings. One is, I think you've got to have an innovation culture in the organization. So a bit like our conversation shows, there is some technology creates fear in people, and some technology creates opportunity. So you have to have an innovation mindset that if you found a construction industry cure for cancer, your company would adopt it, right? So that's number one. So change management is key. Is that how are you going to manage, if successful, how are you going to manage change? So if you're an Arup, to pick an example, and you have 15,000 people, and you figure out that you could deliver the same amount of revenue with 1,000 people, would everybody vote for it?
Hmm.
They wouldn't vote for it, would they? They wouldn't vote for it. But
Yeah.
if you said, and instead of 15,000 people, we're going to earn enough revenue that it would previously take 150,000 people to generate, they would all vote for it.
Yes.
How do you create? And because everybody would be better off, and salaries might be 10 times what they are. So, but it's the same question framed differently. How do you implement change that people can support it and be part of it and make success out of it? And that's what I advise, how I advise people to move forward. That not to fear the change. You can't stop it, but how are you going to plan for it to be successful for you?
Hmm. Interesting. We have talked about AI. If we move beyond AI, and what structural forces, whether sustainability mandates, geopolitical shifts, or any demographic change, do you think will mostly fundamental reshape how we build and design for the next 20 years?
So we're in a period today where The climate on Earth has been changing throughout the history of the planet, right? You know that, and this is one of the coldest periods. This period of 20,000 years, which is mostly human history, certainly organized human history, is one of the coldest periods in the whole history of planet Earth. So we start from a very cold place. We had a mini ice age not that long ago. So that was the last glacial maximum was only 20,000 years ago. United States was covered in ice. And ever since then, it's been heating up. And right today, we understand why. The CO2 in the atmosphere is caused it to heat up. And that's what happened on Venus, which was like us. A long, long time ago, Venus was like Earth, and now it's uninhabitable. And the Earth is getting hotter. The problem at the moment is the difference between cause and effect. So a lot of the cause of the CO2 is in the West, has been through since industrialization, but the impacts are in the global South. They're in the Philippines and Africa. That is going to continue, right? Sea level has risen 400 feet in the last 20,000 years, and is going to continue. And if all the ice on Earth melts, the sea level will be at close to the shoulders of the Statue of Liberty, right? So we know this is a fact. This is going to happen. What is going to happen is that the problems with food, access to food and water and work will cause mass migration. We're already seeing some of that. And people are trying to move to places where there is opportunity and there is food and water and their families can survive. That will get worse. And so what we're going to have to do as an industry is start to address this whole idea of climate change on a global scale, which we haven't been able to do so far in any of the COP conferences that have taken place. Predominantly, in my mind, because there's a disconnect between where the cause is and where the effect is happening. As the effect starts to happen more at home, and you could say that Europe has particularly suffered from migration, and that's going to a lot of political change. Um, you've got to start to address it, and that just doesn't mean building a wall and keeping people out. I'm not saying that. You've got to address the root cause of the problem. How do we how do we create an environment where people can stay in place and survive as the climate is changing? And so opportunities for humans in engineering, architecture, and construction will be plentiful, but they wouldn't be the same as the ones that my generation face.
Okay, interesting. Mass migration. It sounds very scary.
What I would say is, don't there's a matter of choice, right? It's the same thing. You can choose how you feel. You can make a choice. A glass half empty, glass half full. I say that there is a choice. You've got a choice to either be a victim or to actually do something about it. And and if you look at an AI disrupted future and you want to behave like a victim, you will probably be a victim. But if you want to look at an AI enabled future and you want to actually solve some of the problems that are affecting our species on a planetary basis, the opportunities are more than you could ever imagine. And you want to do things that make you happy. And so find out, it's going to be in our next section, but find out what makes you happy and what you where you get enjoyment out of and do that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a perfect slope towards our next chapter, which is leadership and building high performing teams in this AI climate. You advise firms that are trying to grow beyond their founding team and initial model. Um, we talked about arbitrage model, labor arbitrage model as well. What's the leadership failure you see most often in that transition, and why is it so common?
Which transition are you talking about? Just be clearer about that.
So the transition from a founding team, some companies which are in a startup world, which want to grow beyond their founding team, and the initial model, let's say, was the arbitrage model, but now they are planning to outgrow outwards from it. But then there are some failures, leadership failures, or some leadership decisions which are not supporting them in that transition. So why is there a challenge, and why is it?
Okay. Well, so let's say people who start, so, fundamentally, people who start businesses are entrepreneurs, right? And I would say, me personally, I would like to be an entrepreneur, but I'm not. That is not I'm not an inherent risk taker. It's just, and some people love the risk of being an entrepreneur. So first of all, you've got to understand yourself. Anybody who goes to work for someone else, if you want to get, if you want a job, you basically sell your time to someone else, right? And because you have a choice, you could not sell your time to someone else. You could make it for yourself. You could sell your time yourself, but you choose to work for somebody. I think almost by definition, that makes you not an entrepreneur. So the first succession from the entrepreneur founder to the next layer of leadership is giving a company that you've built, it's your baby, to somebody who would never have done it themselves because that's not in their very nature. Very difficult transition. And it becomes the next stage of ownership tends to be with people who are more caretakers than they are growing the business. You know, the old proverb about burying your valuables and under the bushel or under the sand. Are they going to invest in the business, or are they just going to try and avoid it failing? It's not a very that defensive posture is not very sustainable for a business. So in acquisitions, most of the companies that I've acquired throughout my career have been because leadership don't see entrepreneurs in their next level because they hired them, and they hired them as people who work for other people and are not natural entrepreneurs. And and so if they want the company that they founded to go on, they've got to give it to somebody who's got more of an entrepreneurial spirit, which is quite often some sort of sale of the business. If
Mhm.
you look at the life of companies that you talked about, labor arbitrage businesses,
Yeah.
if you look at them, they generally don't survive more than 3 generations in the partnership model. The old owners model was you had partners. Each partner ran a piece of the business, which you called a studio. Each studio had about 20 people in it maximum. And when you outgrew it, you got another studio, and you just created all these studios, and then people could leave, and somebody would come out of one studio and lead another. That was the model. Generally only lasted 3 generations, and those companies either got sold or went bankrupt. It's just the nature of the type of people that go and work for companies. They're not entrepreneurs. Anybody who takes a job is almost by nature, very rarely an entrepreneur.
You have written about the challenge of scaling a firms beyond headcount, and we talked about it in previous chapters as well.
Nah.
Idea that more people doesn't automatically mean more value in future. Then what would be the smarter path or a clever path here to scale? Because businesses are, if they are not scaled, then the revenue won't fit in the shoes of the investors, let's say. So what is this clever path to scale?
The path to scale in any business. So businesses exist to satisfy clients' demands profitably. That's the purpose of a business. And and so you have to understand, if you say, what does that require? You have to understand your client's demands. That's number one. So you have to be specialist. You have to really know your client's businesses to scale. And then you have to do it profitably. You have to say, how do the competition do it? And how can we do it more cost effectively than them? How can we add more value than the competition? Now, in some companies, if you take Arup, they believe that their creative value is worth more than somebody who's less creative. So they put a value on creativity. Other companies put a value on price. They say if we're cheaper, we will be able to grow. But fundamentally, in order for any business to grow, so I described Arup before. We were a specialist sports business where architects and engineers worked together using a computational model that allowed us to design stadiums inside out more cost effectively in terms of overall cost of the project. We can produce better value projects than anybody else in the world. So we didn't say our stadiums are better looking than Populous. We said our stadiums are more efficient than anybody else's, and we can prove it. Uh, and because we're based on a technology that they don't have. And that was our process. And that wins us projects. Yeah, we can make them look great, but the client ultimately wants value. We understood our clients, and we can say we can give you more certainty and better value. And that is true in any market segment. If I want to buy a car, I go, I know I want a BMW from, and which dealership am I going to go to? I know I want it, but you're better value than that guy down the street. Ultimately, that's what it comes down to. And so my advice always is if you want to scale your business, understand first of all, understand that the market is there. There's an addressable market, and then understand what the clients value in that market, and understand what the competition do that you could do better than them, and then go.
That's a nice step.
What Jay Parrish did at Arup Sport was creating a methodology that the firm has continued to follow that
Mm,
really set them apart from everyone else. But it came from Jay.
okay. Oh, nice. When you look back at your own leadership style, what is something you got wrong early on, and how did it change the way you lead now?
Yeah, I think that's where where I went wrong initially was when I was first made a leader. I firmly believed that if I spent more hours working than everyone else, I was doing a good job. So I used to get in first in the morning, stay late in the evening, and then if anybody was late after 6 p.m., I would go to their desk and ask them what they were working on and see if I could help them. And Arab got me a leadership coach, a guy called Barry Lewis, and he said to me, "You do realize that people hate working for you because they're trying to get something done. They're staying late. They want to go home to their family, and in the middle of that, you arrive at their desk and start talking to them about it, making it worse. And they don't want it. Nobody wants to be like you. Nobody wants to work, um, uh, 70 hours a week." He said, you're actually, they look at you and they go, I wouldn't want to be the leader of this business if you have to work 7 days a week, 12 hours a day. And and it made me think. He told me that I should spend Thursday afternoon doing no work, looking out of the window and thinking about where the business was going. And
Mm,
he said, I bet you can't even do it for 30 minutes. And I couldn't. And
okay.
but he made me say, you've got to, the expectation of a leader is that they're looking over the hill and you'll follow them because they have some idea of what's coming and they've got some foresight of how we position our business to be continue to be successful and not just the busiest person in the office. And that was my mistake, and it was a huge change for me to try and become more of a leader who was strategic and less tactical. I think that was a big change for me.
Oh, nice story there. Uh, change, but change management is notoriously difficult. I can say it very confidently as I'm in one of the change piece at at Heathrow now within my commission. You have worked on it from inside the Arup and now from the outside as an advisor as well. What separates the change programs that actually work from those that burn out during the process? Sometimes we initiate a change, but then it does not land properly.
Yeah, if you got a room full of people, say you got 200 people in a room, and you said, "I'm going to ask you two questions," and the first one you're going to put your hand up, and the second one you're not, right? And you said, "Okay, here's the first question: Who wants change in the company?" Everybody, everybody. And then the second question is, who individually, which one of you wants to actually change yourself and how you do things? No, nobody. So what companies do, my experience is, and I saw this at Arup, ACOM, and WSP,
Hmm.
that people would say, "I'm going to put you in charge of some change." I was once put in charge of creating new fee structures that were not time based, right? Coming up with a proposal to the board for ways of getting paid that were not based on selling hours, right? And I was really excited about that. And I did a ton of work and consulted all over the world. But I had the responsibility, but no authority. So when I came to do it, I couldn't do it. I had zero authority. It required other people to want make it happen. And they didn't. They wanted to talk about it. They thought it was a nice subject to talk about, but they didn't want to change because they were doing very well, thank you very much, financially. And there was no burning platform to change. So I would say that the most important thing for change management is one, who's in charge? Do they have the authority to do something? Most times not. Is it supported? Is that supported by the right people in the organization? And if the answer is yes, change has got a chance. But most times the change is no. People go and have a look at it, but it keeps you happy for a limited period of time, but nothing will ever really change.
Yeah, that's very true. I think in some of the initiatives which I have been in my journey until now is the leadership buy-in was a major factor for any change within the organizations. Yeah. Moving to chapter 5, and I think this is one of the closest chapter which I'm learning these days, for strategy, mergers and acquisitions, and building for the long term. Um, Mergers and acquisition in professional services is a tricky subject, and which you are effectively buying people and culture, and yeah, not just the contracts and the revenue and your pipeline books. And what's the biggest mistake acquirers make when any mergers happens?
I think the biggest mistake is what you've described. So you buy companies for a variety of reasons, but mostly because of the accretive revenue and the access to markets. So they give you something you haven't got. You can buy client relationships and track record that would take
Yeah,
you a long time to build in any other way. But as you described, acquiring a company. Well, when two companies come together, they it's like getting married, and they both have to believe that the future is better together than it is apart, and not just say it. They have to really believe it. And there isn't enough time spent on convincing people that I call very important voices. I call them VIVs, the very important voices, the people inside the company that's being acquired that will influence everyone else by how they feel and their body language. There isn't enough time spent convincing them that this is good. The owners want to sell because they're old or and they can't see a future with the next layer of leadership, or they just want out. They're tired of it, um, and so generally they will disappear. but the next layer of people, which aren't just by title, by the people who influence the behavior inside the organization, have to see a better future than the one that they envisaged, which was they were going to become the owners of the business in time. And it's a very difficult it's very difficult not just to get them to say they agree with it, but to actually really believe it. And it takes an awful lot of time. I don't think acquirers put enough effort into doing that.
When a founder comes to you and says, "Hey, we are thinking about selling," what what are the questions which comes to your mind at the very first thought, as a very first thought?
I take the view honestly, and I've done this many times. Like, what is it? Why do you want to sell? What is your motivation? And and if I believe that their motivation is entirely for themselves because they just want to find a way out. They haven't created any succession, and so they want to pass on their failure to someone else. I will say I'm genuinely not interested in helping. If they have really looked at the market and they see really good business sense in a bigger platform, they've got something great to offer, and they want a bigger platform on which to play a bigger opportunity. I'm very interested, and I can definitely help to make that happen. So usually it's either one phone call and thanks, but no, or oh, that's interesting. Let's make something happen. But I have to hear the right words, and I have to believe them. It doesn't take much research to figure out whether if somebody's 72 years of age and they suddenly want to sell their company, you can be pretty sure they haven't got a succession plan.
Yeah, that's true. The geopolitical landscape, like US China tensions, the restoring of manufacturing, net zero mandates, is creating entirely new infrastructure demands and entirely new roles within the industry. How do you advise firms to position themselves to capture those tailwinds?
Yeah, I think you've got to be, the new demands. I mean, some of them, you pick manufacturing in the United States. Just because the federal government says they're going to create manufacturing jobs,
Mm,
it's very hard to believe
yeah,
that there's any good economic basis for that. Why would US workers get paid more than foreign workers. So how is new manufacturing demand gonna lower the cost of goods in the United States? Doesn't make any sense to me. So there's no point chasing projects that are not gonna happen. And a lot of people do that. You know, you have to have very good go, no-go strategies where you can focus on areas that are working. Another on is data centers, right? Example, it's a good example right now. There's lots of data center opportunity, but chasing data centers without a track record is ambulance chasing. You can spend a lot of time and effort, but there's not a lot of reward. So I think you've got to look at what is the critical infrastructure that is necessary to create economic success. I do get post on macroeconomics because I think they ultimately they drive the markets that are available. So, no matter what anybody says about climate change, it's creating a huge market around renewable energy. If we can't believe that closing the Strait of the Hormuz doubles gas prices, we can't believe that wouldn't double wind energy prices. It wouldn't double solar prices, yet it doubles gas prices. It tells you that if you want to be more resilient, perhaps you have to diversify your energy sources. There's a lot of opportunity there for many people who are suffering in this economy. And same for sea level rise. If you wanna do something, if you wanna keep the value of your land, you're gonna have to do something to protect it from sea level rise or, changing weather patterns or whatever they might be. So those are real things that create business and add value to clients. So focus on those. Don't chase ambulances and don't chase projects that have no good economic basis.
Interesting. Yeah, that makes total sense. Thank you, Steve, for being so patient with us. It's a last funny rounds, 5 questions, rapid fire. We don't have to think twice. One building or structure in the world that genuinely stops you in your tracks.
Oh, the Pantheon in Rome. Um, yeah, just the brilliance of Roman mathematics. How did they do that with Roman numerals?
Nice. A book every young engineer or entrepreneur should read.
Yeah, the World According to Physics by Jim Al-Khalili, and the reason is it's fantastic to read, and it takes you back to the fundamental first principles of everything, and that's always important. You know, we used to say maths, physics, and chemistry weren't important in school, but they're everything.
Nice. Biggest myth about the construction industry that people believe.
Yeah, the biggest myth is that the lowest tender is the best price.
Yes, that's true. Uh, if you could fix one thing about the planning system overnight, what it would be? What would it be?
I think planning in general for projects, I think projects have to be part of a community. They're not island. They're actually connected. And I think the biggest thing I'd change is to start looking at things holistically and not just the site that you're considering that you're part of, that how you plug into the bigger ecosystem. And planners say they do that, but they don't do it enough.
Okay. And what's the best advice you have ever been given?
Best advice I've ever been given was by Brian Baxter, who was the guy who hired me at Arup, and he left Arup after 25 years. And his leaving speech, which resonates with me and was the same leaving speech I gave when I left Arup, is it's just a job. It's just a job. Don't think it's ever, no matter who you work for, it's ever anything more than that. It's always your life's way more important. It's just a job.
Interesting. Oh, that's a good advice, and I'm taking it on as well. Steve, this has been genuinely a fascinating conversation, and you have worked on some of the complex challenges, and we talked about from top down approaches, bottom up approaches, from misaligned incentives in AEC to the role of AI in shaping professional services.
Yeah.
I have no doubt our listeners will find this genuinely interesting and incredibly valuable. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in. If you found today's episode useful, please leave us a review, a comment, and share it with a colleague. And subscribe so you never miss an episode. Subscribe is an important word there. We'll see you in the next time on CEO 360. Thank you.